if you're like me and you're starting to think, oh boy, I better start getting on top of what my children are reading, whether that's something assigned by their school or something that they just pick up at your local public library, this is definitely the episode for you. The organization Redeemed Reader is on the show today. Their mission is to help parents navigate the books landscape with their kids and help develop and raise discerning minds. Today, I have the honor of having the founder of Redeemed Reader on the show. Her name is Janie Cheaney, and she is a 6-time published author with Penguin Random House. Also on the show is Betsy Farquhar, who is the managing editor of the organization. She's been with them for over 10 years, and she is also a literary expert with a master's in children's literature, and she was a former English teacher. Both are also moms, and they have really, really great advice on how to stay on top of what our children are reading in a really, really practical way, because let's face it, we can't read everything our child picks up, and how to start guiding our children to be discerning and mindful about the things they're consuming. We also get into tips on how to handle specific situations where the material is concerning, like if it's been assigned by your school district, or maybe it's something your child really, really wants to read. What do we do about that? So let's dive in. It is my pleasure to welcome the Redeemed Reader team. There are certainly tons and tons and tons of books out there just within the children's space alone. How do you go about choosing what books to review?
Yeah, we try to pay attention to the books that are getting a lot of media coverage, for better or for worse, or things that are cropping up on school book lists. I think all four of us, our driving question is this a book my audience needs to know about? And a lot of the time, that's a recommendation, right? This is a great book. We should let people know about it. But sometimes it's more of a consideration. This book is being talked about in your child's school. Here's what's really in it. You know, do with it what you will.
We try to focus on Newbery material. Like every year, we do a round of Newbery discussions for books that are being talked about in that area. Because these are the books that your children are going to see, even if they're homeschooled, they're going to see them prominently displayed at the library and think, oh, that looks interesting.
And Newbery, what is that?
The Newbery is the most prestigious children's book award. It's given by the American Library Association since, I think they had their 100th anniversary a couple of years ago, right, Betsy? Mm-hmm. Something like that. So it's been around for a long time. It's actually the most prestigious children's book award in the world.
It's only given to American authors, though. So if you're a British author, too bad. Even if your book's amazing.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
The wording from the Newbery Committee is the most distinguished book of the year, and their age range is about ages 8 to 14. So it's kind of your classic middle grade. Charlotte's Web was a Newbery honor. Many of the books that, Wrinkle in Time is a Newbery. A lot of the books that people continue to read now were once Newberys.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. Now I'm thinking about my mind's walking down the aisle at the library. It's that gold seal.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
It's the gold seal, or a silver seal is given to honor books.
Okay. That's interesting. So I want to talk a little bit about how you go about reviewing these books. So what are you actually looking out for?
We have two primary rating categories. One is for worldview, and one is for literary excellence, because I think we've all had experience with sort of your classic Sunday school literature where the illustrations might be kind of trite, but the content's really great. Mm-hmm. So that kind of book might get a higher worldview rating, but maybe it's not as great artistically. And then, of course, the opposite happens all the time. The book might be really well written, get a high literary rating, but the worldview is pretty terrible. And if we rate a book, especially on the worldview angle, lower, we try to flesh that out in our review. Maybe they're disparaging to dads. Maybe they're presenting sort of a weird religious pray to the universe kind of vibe. We try to point those things out so that parents know what questions to ask if their child picks it up, or perhaps the book is presenting different morality issues that don't agree with biblical morality. And some parents will choose to let their child read that book, but talk about it. And some parents will think, my child's not ready for that issue yet. So we try to give enough information in our reviews to let parents know and educators, is that a good book for their need, their child?
Is there a spectrum to say, okay, this is a little bit questionable versus like, whoa, this has fallen into the deep end?
I would
Yes.
say there are some books we can't recommend at all.
Mm-hmm.
We, as Betsy mentioned, we generally don't review those unless they are very high profile and like all the kids are reading them, and your child might want to read this book that all the kids are reading.
Mm-hmm.
But in most cases, we might review some books that might have questionable elements, but as Betsy said, we will let you know. But it could have other virtues, it could have other strengths that would be worth talking about.
Yeah.
We call it considerations.
Mm-hmm.
When we spell those out so that parents know, there's a lot of language in this book. That's something to consider. And we'll try to spell out, like, is the villain using all the bad language and it's there to illustrate his, horrible character, or is it just the way the kids are talking? Because it kind of makes a difference.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes a big difference. And it also makes a big difference as to how you talk about it with your kids and allows you to get ahead of it. This is another really good point that my guest who spoke about children's entertainment and media, TV shows, and that kind of thing. She mentioned that she prepares her child. Hey, you might run into this if you're going to choose to watch this movie, or you might do this, and let's talk about it afterwards. So you've already seeded that into their mind, so they're looking out for it. But they also know who to go to if they have questions, if they want to talk about it, if there's something concerning. So I think that's really great that you have that kind of scale, so that parents can be prepared. Let's move on to personal experiences as literary experts and moms, what you do with your own kids and families. Beyond Redeemed Reader, how do you stay on top of what your children are reading?
Janie, you don't have to anymore. Your kids are adults.
My kids are grown. It really wasn't that much of an issue. Children's literature was still mostly children's literature. It was appropriate for children. There were some what we call problem books, more adult issues were beginning to creep into YA, but I really didn't have to deal with that. So as far as a reading culture is concerned, I started reading aloud to my children when they were little bitty, and even when they went to public school for a while, we carved out space in the morning to read aloud, even before they went to school. So that's always been in our culture. We did not have a television, so they both grew up to be readers, and I think they're fairly discerning readers. So I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the time that I had with them, and we kept reading aloud all the way up until they were beyond teenagers. So that's just the main. Well, they were teenagers. We were still reading aloud. Gladys Hunt has a lot to say about that, by the way. So as far as developing a reading culture, that's one of the best things you can do. And I will let Betsy handle the problem books.
Oh, thanks, Janie.
She has had to deal with that personally.
We have dealt with it personally. So we started reading together when they were babies and have continued that. And we've listened to audiobooks in the car ever since they were babies as a family. And so that's provided a lot of opportunities to pause the audio and talk about the book. And we've not intentionally chosen problem books, right? But we listened to Treasure Island when they were maybe 8 or 9. And we had to talk about rum and how maybe that's not the beverage we want to have for dinner tonight. So laying that groundwork, by the time they get to middle school, high school, we already have this habit of talking about what we read and kind of talking about it, not in a sense of good, bad necessarily, but wise and unwise is maybe a better framework. My daughter started reading the Wings of Fire series, and I hadn't read them all, but we'd already started talking about it. And I noticed she quit reading the series And so I said, well, why did you quit reading? I thought you really liked him. And she started telling me about some of the issues in the book. And so I was really proud of her and said, that's a really mature decision to recognize that this is not the series you need to be reading. And, good job. We did lay some ground rules. Nobody, including myself, is allowed to browse the YA section of the library and pull random books off the shelf without doing a little research. And so by modeling that same sort of forward thinking, that kind of equips them to do the same thing, right? Just like you would with a movie. Why is that movie rated that with that particular letter? Is it because it's language? Like, we just need to do a little research. What do we need to know? So that's kind of how we've handled it. We just keep talking about the books. And there are times where we've listened to books that I get a little squeamish about. This would not have fazed me in high school. I wasn't hearing it the same way.
Right.
I think they would hear it at school. So let's talk about it instead of just running away.
Yeah. What did your research process look like as a mom? So maybe your kid picked up a book and you don't know anything about it and they're interested in reading it. What's the first thing you did to figure out, okay, what is this book about beyond, the synopsis?
Calling my friends.
Okay. Yeah.
Amazon reviews are a great resource. If there are particular concerns you have, you can actually search the Amazon reviews for that particular issue. And you can also review the 1 and 2 star reviews of a book. Why do people not like that book? And that will tell you a lot right there. You kind of start to learn which authors you sort of like the best. I look at who blurbs the book, what other authors like this book. And if I recognize an author's name that I really like, that helps, or vice versa. Janie, what do you think?
In connection with that, I also read the acknowledgments. Because an author, you will see that an author has friendships. An author will acknowledge her husband, or quite often an author will acknowledge God. Or Jesus. And I perk up with that. It doesn't mean that their beliefs are going to be exactly like mine, but they at least have some kind of transcendent point of view that could be valuable. So that's very helpful.
Yeah, I never thought
And
about
reading
that.
just a little author bio at the end. But acknowledgments will often give you a sense of what the author believes is important. A lot of them are pretty standard. Thank you to my editor and my agent, and you guys are wonderful, and you gave me a chance and all that. But you can often find some deeper insights.
Yeah, I never even thought about that. I always read them because I think they're just usually so sweet, but I didn't ever think about reading it from that perspective. Where, okay, what is this? What are kind of the values of this author?
We've discovered a lot through the acknowledgments. We've made some great author
clues.
What'd you say, Janie?
Oh, you can pick up clues, not necessarily overt statements, but little clues that give you hints.
And if you really don't know, I would say kind of listen to your gut. If something seems off, read the book first. Most middle grade books are pretty easy to read, or find a different book that you're a little bit more confident about to buy yourself some time. It's kind of like with TV shows, sometimes you're like, something just seems off about the first episode in a season and you're not sure where it's going.
Yeah.
There's no reason to keep watching without doing some research. Find something else.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Quite often you can just skim a book. You can just flip through the pages and kind of go, and it can tell you a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. I love to talk about the flip side. So we talked about how do we as parents kind of get ahead of it and stay on top of what our children are reading. Let's now move into how to help guide our children to make those healthy choices. Betsy, you mentioned your child was reading Wings of Fire, which actually I have read one of those books. She actually decided, hey, maybe this isn't right for me. What are those steps to get our children there as well, so that, we don't have to always be stressed out like, oh, we got to read every single thing that they're going to pick up? How do we get them to also think critically for themselves?
Well, that was one of our purposes in starting Redeemed Reader, was to help children develop discernment, and literature is one of the best ways to do that. So I think we've already mentioned by reading aloud, even by reading aloud maybe a slightly problematic book, you'll have plenty of opportunity to talk about these things.
Yeah.
It also lets your children know that they can talk about these things with you.
Mhm.
Literature gives them a chance to experience the world before they have to go out into it.
Mm-hmm.
And it opens all kinds of avenues for discussion.
I like to ask my kids to, once they get to middle school, I'll ask them, why do you think the author did that? What would have happened if this character had made a different decision? And then you're kind of letting your kids know that the book is not real life. Like, this is somebody's creation, their creative writing assignment, right? And so then they're reading it a little bit differently.
That's a really great point. What are some other discussion questions that you pose? Because I think that really gives almost like a checklist. Okay, like here are some ways to get my child to open up and to have really productive conversations about the literature.
I always start with, what's your favorite part in the book, or who's your favorite character? Just, there's no right or wrong answer.
Mm-hmm.
It gets people talking, and you can say, then you kind of you're given a window into what your child is picking up on. Maybe they think the book is hilarious, and some of the issues that you thought were issues they haven't even picked up on. So that can help you know, if
Yeah.
do we dive in right now, or maybe just kind of file this book away as an example down the road.
Yeah, really good point. Sometimes I think we probably overthink and stress about things that never even has entered our child's
Oh, right.
mind. Like,
Mhm,
how are we going to handle this?
mhm.
Well, it's a non-issue, at least right now. So I think that's a really good point.
And another good question is to get them to compare books or characters, even from a book to a movie. Who does this remind you of? What does this story remind you of? If there's a direct biblical connection, well, how does this compare to Moses? Or, pick somebody they might know from the Bible, and just to get them thinking. And it's really amazing the connections kids will start to make. They'll say, well, this reminds me of Frodo. And you're like, Frodo? And as they unpack it, you realize, well, yeah, there are some similarities there. And all of those things are building literary analysis without calling it analysis.
Analysis. I think we can intellectualize books. This is something that schools do, is they try to make it an academic exercise, and that robs the fun of reading. Reading, I think, first of all, should be absorbing and fun and interesting. Not every book will speak to every reader, of course, and we don't have to make every book a discussion project either. Some books can just be read for fun.
Hmm.
But there are those books, especially books that we feel are meaty and just have really good material for discussion, that we should engage with our kids about.
Hmm. Yes. Yes. Love that. Now let's talk about two specific situations. We talked a little bit about, what's going on in the school system. Why is there some very concerning literature starting to circulate within our schools? If one of those pieces of literature does get assigned by your child's teacher, how have you handled that? I mean, what's your best advice on what to do?
Read the book yourself first. Before you do anything else, before you
Mhm.
listen to other people's thoughts on it, read it yourself, or at least read enough to know what the issues are. Because if you haven't read it, nobody's going to listen to your protest. And it may not be objectionable. Maybe people have blown things out of proportion. So that would be my first suggestion: is do your homework.
You might do, if you do read the book and you think, I just don't want my child to read this. You
Mhm.
might be able to talk to the teacher and suggest a substitute, like a book on a similar theme, a similar background. Betsy had a wonderful post on The Kite Runner,
Mm.
which has some scenes that I wouldn't want a 14-year-old boy to read.
Mhm.
Um, but she had a list of suggestions. You can always It's always best to try to open up avenues of communication
Mhm.
with the teacher before you come down hard on, I will not let my child read this. and suggest a substitute. So we came up with a list, or Betsy came up with a list of substitutes for the Kite Runner.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we might be able to do that for other books too.
Yeah, I would ask the teacher, when you're thinking about it as a conversation, ask them why are we reading it? Not in a, why are we reading this, but what are we hoping our students get out of this book? And let me think if there's a way we could substitute. And if they really refuse completely, I would read the book with my child.
Yeah.
And prep your kid. There's going to be some hard things in this book, and let's talk about it. Let's not be afraid of it. They wouldn't be comfortable, but that would be a better resource than complaining about the school only.
Yeah. I hear you there. and reading it yourself, because a lot of things, you're right, can be taken out of context. I love that you're also giving parents, another avenue as well to not only read it, but also discuss it with your kid. Again, getting ahead of it and seeing it in your child's mind that, hey, you're going to come across some stuff that is not healthy for your heart, mind, and soul. Let's talk about it. So always keeping those discussion avenues open, even with the teacher. Because, let's face it, teachers have it hard as well. Maybe it wasn't the teacher's choice to assign a particular piece of literature to the students. Maybe it is from the board. Maybe it's from someone else. I mean, we don't know, right? So just working as a team within your family unit, but also between the parent and teacher, I think is really important points that you've brought up.
I think, too, you can allow your child to skip a chapter. The Kite Runner, since we brought that up, that's a really good example. There's one chapter that's exceptionally hard.
Yeah.
And you could just say, look, and if your kid is in high school, the Kite Runner is a high school book. So this would flex depending on the age of your child. But, give your teenager a little bit of ownership. Say, there's some hard stuff. If you want to skip this chapter, that's fine with me. And letting your child take some ownership, but kind of know that you're in their court.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Are there other things that you recommend doing if your child does want to step into that deep end? You've told them, hey, this is what you might run into, not healthy for your heart, mind, and soul, but they're like, that's fine. I'm going to read it anyway.
Pray hard.
Yes. Yep.
We were chatting yesterday among the four of us. You encounter some harsh things in the Bible. There's another YA author. He passed away some time ago, called Robert Cormier, and he wrote some pretty heavy YA books. He was a devout Catholic, though, and his view was that any subject can be read by a teen, or a teen can encounter any subject, but the way you handle it is what makes the difference. And he tried to write from a very moral framework as he wrote about some very difficult subjects. And I respect that. We are trying to teach our children to see the world from a Christian worldview, and one way you do that is by encountering difficult topics, as the Bible does. So there's really nothing in the world that we need to be afraid of, but we do need to be wary of what, how our minds, our views can be altered, and be forewarned against that. So, if your teenager says, I want to read it, say, okay, I'm going to read it with you.
Yeah, doing it together. You're so right, though. The Bible does have some really tough, sometimes terrible things in it, especially that Old Testament. Oh, man.
Right.
Genesis. I mean, you start with Genesis and you're in the weeds already.
Right. You're so right.
And part of that, theologically, that is due to our sin nature. These horrible things happen when we are unrestrained.
Right.
I think another part of this discussion is to view your reading as like your diet. And I might not want to eat Doritos for my entire sustenance. Is a bag of Doritos going to hurt me? No. But I should also be eating whole grains and fruits and vegetables and, all the right things. And so that's another way to look at it is, what is my child's media diet as a whole? Are we just saturating ourselves in horrible things? Or is this kind of an isolated read? And then the rest of our media consumption is helping shape that and balance it out a little bit, because that can do a lot.
Yeah.
The same holds true for like Christian romance, for instance. Are we reading, or are our girls reading too much of that? Are they getting an unrealistic view of what romance is?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's a balanced diet is important for your intake, whether it's spiritual or physical or mental.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad both of you brought that up, because as moms, we can really overstress on certain things when maybe it is just a little slice of the diet. And it's an important slice. We don't want to minimize it, but let's not ignore all the other great things that are happening as well that does paint a healthy diet, despite maybe that little slice or topic that you've come across.
And sometimes I'm thinking of a younger audience, say it's a 9-year-old, and the book has some moral issues that maybe you weren't going to address with your child quite that early, but that's a great avenue to talk about the issue without vilifying a person they actually know in real life. Let's talk about this baby that this unwed mom had, and how great it is that God created marriage, and just start talking about it without having to throw their friends under the bus.
Yeah.
So that's another thing to remember. They're assaulted by news all the time these days that has horrible stuff in it, and sometimes books are a safer place to kind of grapple with those ideas, even if it's an uncomfortable space. It can provide an avenue for preparing them for real life, for people they might meet, and experiences they might hear about.
Yes, really good points. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think you've given us so much wisdom here. All right, Mama, redeemedreader.com has so many more resources that'll help you out in this children's literature space. They have book lists on all kinds of topics, mysteries, retro picture books, biographies, and they also post reflections to help guide parents through various issues like how to handle bad language in books. If you want a really easy way to stay on top of what's going on in the children's book world, they have a newsletter as well that includes recent reviews, things going on, banned books, Newbery Award books. All of that stuff can be found on their website, along with a membership structure if you're interested in getting a print magazine. It's quarterly, also includes interviews and book lists and things like that. So head to redeemedreader.com. You can also find the link in the show notes. If you know a mom who would really value this conversation and it'll also help her navigate children's books and everything going on there, share this episode with them. You can do it right from your podcast app, or you can send them to momsgrabcoffee.com. Okay, that's a wrap for today, and I hope you have a beautiful, hope-filled, blessed week. And I'll catch you again next week for a cup of coffee with a side of faith, wisdom, and hope.